Hello there. Today we're playing Kenshi. Kenshi follows one rule and one rule only: survival of the fittest. In a land where people are constantly trying to rob you, assault you, enslave you, and eat you alive, people need to know how to defend themselves. And I'm going to teach them for a fee. That's right, I'm going to teach you how to defend yourself, whether you like it or not. My goal? Make 250,000 cats by spreading the art of Bullshido across the world, and take out the strongest martial artist in the game, Tin Fist. To do that, we'll need to train our skills from the ground up, beat up strangers, collect payment, kidnap people, drink milk, open a dojo, kidnap more people, artificially inflate the local crime rates, raise my prices, and finally, kidnap myself. Standing in my way are random hobos, cross-dojo wars, constant raids from religious fanatics, and worst of all, my own incompetence. Can we become the strongest martial artist and spread the art of Bullshido across the world? Or will the IRS lock me up for fraudulent behavior? Time to find out. Time for that big in. Where is it? We start our journey once again in familiar territory, half naked in the hub. Meet our protagonist, Count Dante, loosely based on the late and great Count Dante, the most dangerous man who ever lived, a grand master of every martial art known to man, and, by all accounts, a complete and total fraud. Our first order of business was selling our disgusting, putrid sword, an insult to everything we stood for. Count Dante didn't need a weapon. Count Dante was the weapon. Before becoming a world-renowned sensei of Bullshido, there was one minor problem. Dante was terrible at literally everything, and all he had to his name was the dusty rags on his back. So we needed to get stronger. The first and easiest thing we could do at the hub was to train both strength and athletics. I did this by mining an inventory full of copper ore, then slowly running around the streets like a drunk man who lost his lighter. Strength was important because it improves our damage output and attack speed in martial arts. Athletics matters because it gives us the single greatest defensive technique ever devised: running away. After spending several days convincing the locals that he was a complete and total psychopath, Dante had leveled his strength to 15 and athletics to 40. With our first bit of training completed, I thought it was time to test our capabilities in a real fight. So, my first opponent, a disabled man. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Wins, why do you always pick on the less fortunate? You see, that's where you're wrong. You made the assumption that Dante was superior to a paraplegic. He was not. As the bandit slowly crawled away, Dante was stuck in a slow and perpetual shuffle, somehow unable to catch a man without legs. Not satisfied with this outcome, I decided to harass the local homeless population instead, considering our troubles assaulting the handicapped. This was not a good idea, and immediately upon throwing the first punch, Dante got his shit rocked. Lying face down in the dirt may level your toughness a little, but it was clear something had to change. I sold the copper, gathered some supplies, and bought a map to a rumored martial arts village deep in the south. This surely would be the place that Dante could catch his big break and become the martial arts genius he was always destined to be. So we left the hub and made our way to the village. We traveled for days, through the scorching desert and past ancient ruins, all the while being hunted by a swamp ninja for 10 kilometers. Finally, we arrived, and monks rushed out to obliterate this man's cranium. If Dante could learn even a fraction of that power, we would be absolutely stinking rich. The martial village was the sacred homeland of martial arts, filled with monks that came in all shapes and sizes, honing their craft, meditating, and just zenning the fuck out. It was a perfect place for Dante to fake his training and lure in unsuspecting students. Dante immediately sought out the village leader, Subaru, the living embodiment of a lifestyle stripped down to the bare minimum. And holy shit, look at those stats. Anyway, Dante officially joined, becoming the first monk in recorded history with an afro. To fit in, I bought an apprentice's robe and got chatting with some of the grand elders, who quickly expressed concerns about our capitalistic tendencies. And so, the training arc had officially begun. Here, Dante learned to hone his combat skills. He trained day and night in the most intense regimen of all time. This consisted of him sitting on his ass, inside a giant flower on the Buddha's throne, next to a tree on a cliff. He also completed his first monk quest, primarily by watching the other monks do it for him, officially rising up the ranks to become a monk apprentice. After sitting on his ass for nearly a month straight, Dante's training was over. I'm not sure what was more surprising, the fact that this qualified as a training regimen, or the fact that it actually worked, leveling his martial martial arts, toughness, dexterity, perception, strength, and dodge skills to more respectable levels. After this grueling routine, Dante decided to blow off some steam by getting drunk at the local pub. Yes, monks got pissed too. Dante was now, technically, a martial artist, so it was time to actually start making some money. We were a month in. So far, all we'd done is got knocked out, sat on our ass, and got blind. So Dante purchased some new drip, grabbed 3 bottles of mummy's milk for the road, and left the martial village a changed man, skilled, confident, and completely ready to rip off naive teenagers. There's many suitable locations for scamming people in Kenshi, but Dante chose to take his services to Blister Hill, the beating heart of the Holy Nation. The Holy Nation is a theocratic, deeply racist society where religion governs every aspect of daily life. Its citizens are conditioned from birth to submit to a higher authority, surrender their autonomy, and hand over their earnings to a man they've never met. They were practically already in a Ponzi scheme. We just needed to change the man at the top. They also had the biggest population. More people means more potential clients. Our first client was a local Chinese man. He came to me to learn how to defend himself from a racist society that treated him as a second-class citizen. He was an ideal candidate for self-improvement, so I ran him through some quick drills, beginning with a jumping sidekick to the face. With the session finished, our first client was left both thrilled and unconscious. So I collected 170 cats and everything he had as payment for my services. Emboldened by corporate greed, we moved on in search of our next student, another agent from the CCP, but he was severely injured. However, it would actually be Dante who was the student this time, and the teacher took the form of a 7-foot Naginata, with Dante writhing around in the sand. It was clear we still had a lot to learn. Alongside several open wounds leaking from his stomach, I decided to add traumatic brain injury to the autopsy report. It was a rough start. If Dante had a professional fighting record, it would already be negative. The more Dante got folded up like a lawn chair, the less people would believe that he was the most dangerous man in the world, which means less cash for us. We needed to be strategic with our target, clients. To recover from our recent run-in with CTE, I lodged at the local inn. If we wanted to start making real money, we needed to rebuild our reputation. And like an act of divine intervention, that exact same prick who stabbed me in the desert was downstairs getting pissed. So Dante charged across the bar and backhanded him across the face to begin the second class. This guy was tough, and he stabbed Dante in the chest multiple times. But things were different now. Not only were we at full health, but the fight was happening indoors. And much like an Aussie in a pub, we got a buff for punching on indoors. Dante ended the lesson with a clean 1-2 down the pipe, leaving with 160 cats, clothes, a weapon, and his reputation restored. With my ego intact, it was time to expand our clientele. We needed to spread the art of bullshido far and wide across the land. So we worked our way through the surrounding roads, beating up bandits, wanderers, and solo traders. We even attempted our first group lesson on a pack of starving bandits and began to see Dante's skills develop before our very eyes. However, after collapsing from pure exhaustion, these bastards stole my precious milk. Cities were another good way to source clients. Our strategy relied on 3 core pillars: kidnapping, grand larceny, and battery. By appealing to the guards' deep humanitarian instincts, I was able to run larger group sessions for the city's less fortunate. They didn't have much in the way of cash, so Dante extracted their skulls as payment instead. I also pioneered a technique that would become central to our training curriculum. Midway through a lesson, I would call for a brief intermission, at which point the student, believing the session was over, would begin to heal themselves. Dante would then reconvene the lesson with a haymaker from behind. I called it interval training, and the results spoke for themselves. By now, Dante had built up a solid reputation for being a total douche with a bag and 10,000 cats. It was a good foundation, but one-on-one lessons had a ceiling, and I fucking hated ceilings. If we were serious about spreading the art of bullshido, then we needed to expand. 10,000 cats was a start, but it wasn't fuck you money, and Dante hadn't sat on his ass for a month straight without getting rich for it. The problem was that Dante was but one man, with just 2 fists, and finite hours in the day. If we wanted to scale, we needed my favorite type of labor: unpaid. So Dante made the long journey back to the martial village to repay them for teaching him everything he knows. He abducted an apprentice in the dead of the night and transported him halfway across the map on his shoulder. We may have been capable of beating any man in unarmed combat, but technologically, we were about as intelligent as an alpha male podcast. We hadn't yet learnt the futuristic capability of building a metal cage. So we needed to borrow someone else's. And who has plenty of cages? Why, the Holy Nation, of course. So I stopped by the local slave camp and threw this man in a cell. He awoke to find Dante crouching over him and happily agreed to sign his life away. Meet Jim. Every good Jim needs one. Even though I was personally responsible for his incarceration, the moment I freed him, the alarm sounded, and the entire camp came running out to kill us. So we sprinted out the gates and ran for our lives, with the soul guard refusing to give up the chase. I figured this was a good chance to see what all my hard work had been for. Jim, take it away. Oh, fuck. Alright, with our first prison break successful, it was time for the second. So we ran all the way back to the martial village, kidnapped another monk, travelled all the way back, imprisoned her, then used Jim to break her out because Dante had a bounty, ran for our lives, and got a chance to see Rhonda's skills firsthand. Nice. With a team of 3, we could finally start taking on higher paying clients, most notably Holy Nation guards. They usually carried between 100 and 500 cats, and their gear would sell for roughly another 800, meaning each standard guard brought in somewhere around 900 to 1,300 cats, depending on the quality of their weapons and armor. The only downside to this strategy was that we couldn't really sell the gear inside Holy Nation territory due to the high fencing risk, so we'd have to travel to fringe settlements to trade. After several productive sessions with law enforcement, we'd cleared 25,000 cats, a solid start, but traveling to our clients was inefficient. If we wanted to scale the business, we needed to stop going to the customers and start making the customers come to us. Gentlemen, it was time to open a dojo. I chose to build it just west of Blister Hill. That way we could be near a town for supplies and potentially snatch people before or after they made their way to the capital. I began construction on a small shack and a research bench. Jim was appointed as the head of admin, not because he was any good at it, he was actually a moron, but because he was the worst fighter. We were a business now. Businesses have income and expenses. If expenses exceed income, you go broke. And if income exceeds expenses, you get bitches. Our biggest expense was food, so I got to work planting a small wheat farm by wasting half the crops of the generous farmers from down the road. Then I constructed a grain silo and a bread oven, and voila, bread. Our first customers arrived shortly after and immediately tried to murder everyone on the premises. Unfortunately, we weren't open to the public yet, so like true combat professionals, we ran away. While we built the base, we still needed to make money, so we ambushed a nearby settler camp, beginning our lesson by sneaking behind their strongest fighters, clasping our hands together and thumping them across the head. Today's lesson was simple. Anything you own now belongs to us. After selling all of their goods, we made it to 36,000 cats, which we reinvested straight back into the gym, building a bigger space, which we filled with some actual training equipment, sparring mats, bench presses, pull-up bars. These would help us to get stronger in our spare time at the dojo. Speaking of which, this place needed a name. Ladies and mainly gentlemen, welcome to McDojo, the home of Bullshito. To celebrate the grand opening of McDojo, we ganged up on a rich man who was wandering by and taught him how to use Aikido when outnumbered. It really blew his mind. This was our highest paying client yet, just under 8k, and an inventory full of expensive items. Word was spreading quickly about McDojo, and a large group of bandits arrived on our doorstep, kindly asking for a group instructional. A massive fight broke out, and bandits with swords and crossbows began storming into the dojo. But Dante and his followers had grown stronger, and punched, dodged, and kicked their way through the 11 bandits. After taking some damage, class was dismissed, and the dojo's interior was littered with the bodies of more happy customers. We'd also set up a public-facing shopfront for any travelers to come in and purchase whatever gear they needed. This was just another way for us to monetize the gym, and one of the most lucrative ways too. After a massive shopping spree from crypto investors, we'd grown our wealth to 72,000 cats. But making money wasn't enough. We needed a force capable of taking down Tin Fist, and that meant growing our roster. So
today's subject is slavery.
Jim spent several days researching, upgrading the gym's technology, constructing a windmill for electricity, and unlocking the imprisonment tech. With this breakthrough, we installed McDojo's newest piece of training equipment, a crucifix. We sourced our first test subjects from a nearby Holy Nation farm. Because of this, we pissed off the Holy Nation a little. But one little bonus to having a crucifix is that you can effectively gaslight your prisoners into believing it wasn't you that imprisoned them, restore your relations with the faction, and then force them to join your cult. And with that, we added a couple new members to the team, Steven Seagal and Uma Thurman. Now, any serious business needs to understand the basic laws of supply and demand. We had plenty of supply. What we needed was demand. Specifically, we needed the population of Blister Hill to feel significantly less safe than they currently did. Luckily, I had a plan. And after beating up another rich guy, we traveled all the way to Shem, a beautiful oasis, with only a slight chance of being eaten alive. But luckily, that was exactly why we were here. We needed to capture some big things. Many martial artists seek out tough and strenuous challenges to prove themselves. And Dante was no different when it came to making money. So we charged headfirst into a couple of carnivorous, mutated drafts. Big things were gigantic, man-eating creatures that dealt massive AoE damage. Dante and his crew needed to use everything they'd learned up until now to come out of this alive. Jim, being Jim, got knocked the fuck out pretty early on, so it was up to just Dante and Rhonda. We could take advantage of the delay in between their one and only attack, and then rush back in. We managed to take one out, but whilst Dante was healing, the second one beat him over the head. Luckily, Rhonda managed to use her chi to bring the beast down. So we healed up, then limped back to Blister Hill with them over our backs. Once we arrived, I released one in the local pub, and another on the streets. Within seconds, the beast regained consciousness and began tearing into the flesh of innocent civilians. They caused mass hysteria, dealing huge area of effect damage, painting the sand red. As you might imagine, two giant, man-eating big things ripping apart civilians made the population feel a little unsafe going outside. With the streets no longer safe, Dante moved the operation indoors, specifically by breaking into the local residences to violently assault people while they slept. He would then kidnap them and conscript them into our bullshito cult. By doing this, I had artificially driven up the crime rates in Blister Hill and began traumatizing its people, both in the streets and their homes. With local law enforcement failing to provide sufficient protection, people had no choice but to defend themselves. And thanks to the new neon lights I installed at McDojo, the solution to their problems was clear as day. It was the perfect marketing funnel, and soon new members flooded in our doors. During the day, the dojo resembled some type of schizophrenic fever dream, with limbs blown off bodies at Mach speed. At night, our practitioners trained themselves, getting stronger with their hands and lighter on their feet. To look the part, everyone got their own gis and punching mitts. Not only would this look more professional than turning up to a lesson butt naked, but it would also improve our martial arts skills. However, our promotions also attracted the attention of rival gyms, and so began our first cross-dojo raid from the Black Genin Ninja. 19 of their strongest men came charging into our dojo and began viciously staring at a wall. Stunned by this act of pure brilliance, I regained my composure and remembered my training. Always strike first. So we rushed in and started punching on in the kitchen. They had katanas, but we had months of training that hardened our flesh and let us dodge strikes like billionaires avoiding accountability. After approximately 432 jumping sidekicks, we won and had defeated the Black Ninja. After pawning all of their belongings, we'd made just over 82,000 cats. It wasn't 250,000, but coincidentally, one man was walking around with a 100,000 bounty stapled to his forehead. His name was Tin Fist, and Dante was almost ready for him. Almost. There was one surefire way to fast-track McDojo to record profits, and prepare the men for Tin Fist, Prayer Day. If you've played Kenshi before, there's a good chance you already know what that is. But if you haven't, allow me to explain. If you settle in Holy Nation territory, then once a week, priests, accompanied by heavily armed paladins, will pay you a visit for Prayer Day. If you have this book, then you're completely fine, provided they don't sniff out any illegal immigrants you might be harboring under your floorboards. But if you don't have this book, or you piss off the priest, or your entire squad happens to be female, they'll leave and return the next day with all their cousins to slaughter and incarcerate every non-believer they can find. And that's exactly why I moved here. You see, unlike the United Cities, you didn't have to pay taxes here, and could essentially take on the Holy Nation when it suited you, whilst only having to pray prior to doing so. And for the past 2.5 months, we've been training our men, growing stronger, in preparation to take the Holy Nation head on. Once you attack Prayer Day, the Holy Nation will begin to send progressively larger and more dangerous assaults to your base. Usually, this would mean certain death, but usually, Dante wasn't there. So, my plan was simple. Farm the Holy Nation for both profit and combat experience, and try to avoid getting everyone killed in the process. When the next prayer day arrived, we surrounded them, then attacked. Honestly, I had no idea if we were strong enough for this. Each paladin carried a two-handed greatsword, and within seconds, most of us were suffering from either severe blood loss or traumatic brain injuries. But our prowess prowess for unarmed combat had grown immensely. Our switch kicks were faster, our knees were harder, and our punches were strong enough to cause internal hemorrhaging. After an intense struggle, we defeated Prayer Day. I collected our payment, healed our wounded, and absorbed the most capable amongst them into the dojo. With that, we'd crossed the 100k mark. The men immediately returned to training. There was no time to rest. Another Holy Nation assault was already on the way to McDojo. Within a couple of days, they arrived, and they had more men this time. Fighting immediately broke out in front of the dojo, with some local community members volunteering to murder law enforcement. How nice. Although there was more of them, this fight was different. Our fighters were stronger. Each of our blows cracked their bones, rendering their limbs useless. All our training and fighting had paid off, and once again, the Holy Nation was defeated. Shortly after, two massive groups of investment bankers cleared our shop inventory, boosting our profits to 185,000 cats. We'd never been stronger or richer, but the next raid was going to be the real test. A major Holy Nation assault with 7 servants, 10 paladins, and 2 high paladins, all led by an inquisitor, the Giga Chad of the Holy Nation. They charged immediately, carving into our flesh like an average American traffic stop. All the while, spewing some prime shithousery. Dante attempted to take control of the situation, but he blacked out after being impaled by a paladin. Nevertheless, McDojo fought on. Through the great teachings of Dante and the sacred art of Bullshido, we crushed paladin chest plates and narrowly avoided decapitation. Before long, the battlefield was littered with corpses and severed limbs. I even found the Inquisitor cowering behind our bread oven, and Jim delivered a final blow to sever his spinal cord. With most of our men severely mutilated, we won, and had defeated a major Holy Nation attack, thanks to our booked-out educational lectures from the government. Our combat skills had grown immensely, and McDojo's wealth had now surpassed 200,000 cats, just 50k short of our goal. A group of monks even travelled to McDojo, offering their assistance, so I crucified the 3 strongest, and forced them into our MLM. After outfitting the crew with better gear and gathering supplies, it was finally time to leave McDojo and place our final stamp on martial arts. Our destination? Spring, home of the anti-slavers, led by none other than Tin Fist. All 28 of us made the long journey to Spring through winding canyons and piss-filled waters. After scaling the side of a mountain, we finally arrived. I scouted the headquarters and quickly discovered one slight problem. There was no drug testing in Spring, and Tin Fist and his bodyguards had been abusing TRT for years. If we attacked head-on, the fight would resemble a genetically modified gorilla versus a baby without any limbs. So, a direct attack was out of the question. For a moment, I considered kidnapping Subaru and forcing him to fight Tin Fist for us. But that wouldn't do. Dante needed all the credit himself. So, I devised another strategy. We didn't actually have to beat Tin Fist in a fair fight. All we needed to do was capture him alive. Once we cashed his bounty, the world would just assume that Dante had beaten Tin Fist himself. And luckily, one of us had 90 assassination, which gave us a decent chance at knocking him out. But shit would hit the fan as soon as we did this. So, the men took their positions. Then, I crept up behind Tin Fist. And it actually fucking worked. Immediately, the entire anti-slaver faction began indiscriminately murdering everybody. So we threw Tin Fist over our shoulder and ran. I sacrificed a small detachment of my loyal followers to slow them down, whilst the rest of us sprinted down the mountain. Tin Fist's bodyguards gave chase and began cutting down our men one by one. We'd spent months honing our combat skills, but these guys were on a completely different level. However, after running for 10 kilometers, we finally lost them, and Tin Fist was ours. We gathered the survivors and made the long journey to hang within United City's territory. Upon arriving, the guards were in disbelief that Dante brought down the mighty Tin Fist. We made our way into the station and handed Tin Fist over to the police chief, collecting our 100,000 cat reward. With that, it was official. We'd reached our goal of 250,000 cats and defeated Tin Fist. Dante was rich beyond his wildest dreams and now had the reputation of being the strongest martial artist to ever walk the land. He'd lied, scammed, assaulted, kidnapped, and bullshitted his way to the very top. Dante had taught self-defense en masse, and now the world was a worse place for it. Maybe there's a lesson here for everyone. If you want to get rich, just scam people.